Well, hello. So my name's Danny, and this is episode 2 in Spinal Stories, and it's a little series I've been putting together, trying to showcase the individual achievements of people with a spinal injury, because the presumption, unfortunately, often enough, by members of the public and sometimes also ourselves, is that once you have this sort of injury, life is over and nothing is worth it anymore. But obviously, that's not the case, and the man sitting not before me, but virtually, is hopefully a fine example of that. So this week we have Brian Abram. And Brian, I wonder whether you'd like to just introduce yourself briefly.
Okay, I'm 66, soon to be 67, which is quite depressing. Um, and I became spinally injured just a fraction over 10 years ago.
Okay.
Um, and com the guys are in the know. I'm a complete T9 paraplegic. I sustained a lot of other injuries as well that still affect me now, from the trauma, which was pretty spectacular. I'm sure you'll ask me about that. Um, so my health is maybe not as good as your average T9 complete paraplegic, um, compounded by age, of course.
Mhm.
Getting on with a spinal injury is not a lot of fun. So I was 56 when it happened, 66 now.
Okay.
Um, so that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks for that introduction. And I will touch on that if that's okay, just because,
Oh, yeah, sure.
if not to make the point that spinal injury rarely comes alone, and that given that they're often caused by trauma, you've got a myriad of other injuries alongside it, which make it even harder. So,
Sure.
are you able to tell me a bit more about perhaps how you sustained the injury and
Yeah, yeah.
what related injuries were?
Yeah, absolutely. I should have mentioned my family, of course. My wife is a little bit younger than me, been married for 40 odd years, two kids who are grown up, and one grandson who is very important in what I've done post injury. So we'll come on to that. Right, the day of the accident, brings back horrible memories. Very quiet Sunday morning. We were staying with friends about 33 miles away from where we live in a little village in Derbyshire near Glossop. And I planned to cycle home the next day because I was a bit of a mammal, middle-aged man in Lycra.
Yes.
Um, quite a keen cyclist. I used to, because I wasn't working, I was doing some consultancy and only working when I wanted to. So I had a lot of free time to just go out, do an hour's cycling, come home. We lived in a very hilly area. So a few miles outside my house was like a massive workout. So I was reasonably fit, had a nice bicycle, but I just bought a new one because me and a friend were planning to cycle to the south of Spain just for fun with nothing but a credit card to find somewhere to stay. And that was going to be a big adventure.
Sounds fantastic.
Um, so I thought I'd better get some practice in. So I planned to cycle 33 miles home from where we lived. I got 1 mile down the road, unfortunately, and then came off my bicycle. What happened, I think, because my memory is a bit sketchy, I wasn't hit by a car, I know that,
Hmm.
but I was kind of bullied to the side of the road. Very impatient driver wanted to get past me on a narrow road.
Right.
So the result of that was my bicycle moved to the side, skidded, and I fell off. This is where it gets unlucky because had I fallen off anywhere else on the route, I think I'd probably have been fine. But the point where I fell off, there was a very low dry stone wall, and I mean literally 2, 3 feet.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I kind of pivoted over it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Uh, and all I remember is falling backwards, seeing the trees branches going away from me, and then a massive thud as I hit a tree backwards.
Oof.
The drop down was about 30, no, maybe 20 odd feet. So came detached from the bicycle, hit the tree backwards, which did several fractures to the neck, lumbar, thoracic and lumbar vertebrae, but the big one was at T9. Um, broke both shoulder blades, collarbone, various internal injuries to the extent that I probably should have died because I then ended up in a river face down.
Oh,
Um, I know that's pretty lots of bad luck combining there, isn't it?
rough.
Um,
Very rough.
and I was kind of weakly trying to shout for help because I was seriously injured. And the last thing I remember was a lady shouting, "There's someone in the water." And that was it. Don't remember anything else until I woke up from a coma 3, 4 weeks later. And even then, I didn't really know what had happened.
Wow.
Um, and then I was in Manchester Royal, where I developed a God Almighty sacral pressure sore after a few days, which shouldn't have happened, but I wasn't looked after properly, shall we say.
Mm.
Then Salford Royal, and then Pinderfield Spinal Unit. Total time in hospital was 50 weeks.
50
Um,
weeks, so almost a
yeah,
year.
yeah. Came home not at all rehabilitated because the enormous pressure sore meant I spent most of that time in bed, could hardly do any proper rehab.
Hmm.
I think they were scared of furthering the damage actually, so they just had me doing a bit of weight training to get stronger. But I'd never really properly learned to transfer. Bowel care was not proper. So when I came home, I still needed a hell of a lot of help from district nursing and various other sets of people. So I guess I don't think I felt okay
Yeah.
for another 6 months after that.
Wow.
Um, Came
Okay.
out of hospital to a house I'd never seen
Hmm.
uh, because we couldn't move back to our 2-story house on a hill.
A
That
familiar
would have been
story.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But we were so fortunate that we saw a bungalow for sale while we were in hospital, which is very rare around here because it is so hilly.
Hmm.
Um, but there's one area where there are bungalows, and one came on the market, and I looked at the floor plan and thought, wow, that could be perfect.
Hmm.
So we put an offer in, got it accepted, got a firm of contractors to completely refurbish the inside so it was suitable with a nice big wet room, um, just everything good about it. I should say we had to finance this ourselves because I'm not one of these people that's had compensation.
Right.
Um, but luckily, we were financially in a position to do it.
Hmm.
So I came home to a house that I'd seen the design of, but I'd never actually seen it.
Yeah.
My wife used to bring in samples of tiles to hospital and say, "Are these okay?" I say, "Yeah, fine." Um, so that was quite bizarre, really. And again, that's an aspect of what happens to us that I think would be hard to appreciate unless you've been through it.
I think you're right there. Yeah. There's a lot of things to touch on there, and thanks for sharing it. I think
Sorry.
it's often the
I was serious when said I should be dead. What I now know, what I now know, I didn't know at the time, I found out some considerable time later, was that when the lady shouted, there was a man camping nearby with his dad. His dad rang 999. He came in the water and kept my head out of the water, apparently,
yeah.
and that saved my life
I
because
think
I
yeah.
tore my aorta as well, which is ridiculous. That should have killed me on its own.
Yeah. It's
Um,
one of the more
so
important
yeah,
blood vessels in
very,
the body.
very, very, very lucky man.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, towards the end of this chat, I'll finish with the story about how I was reunited with those two people.
That would be
Uh,
lovely to end it.
it's amazing. It's an amazing story.
We'll hold the
Promise.
suspense for that then. Did anything, did they catch the driver or was he long gone, he or she long gone?
If I'm generous, he didn't see me when I went over the wall.
Right.
If I'm being cynical, he did see me because immediately down the road there was a turn onto a bridge over the river.
Okay.
And if I'm being cynical, he probably did see me.
Okay.
But there you go. I one thing I don't do with my spinal injury is what ifs.
Yes,
I can't. I can't because it beats you up.
that is something to chat about as well. We could play that
Yeah,
game for a long time. But
for sure.
as someone who I also sustained my injury in a cycling accident
Yes. Yeah.
and was a fairly experienced road cyclist prior to that, and I'm very familiar with the close pass just kind of forcing you
Yeah.
into the gutter. It's a very uncomfortable sensation because there's nowhere to go, is there?
No. Well, not when you've got a wall at the side of you.
No.
And of course, I've never been there before, so I had no idea what was the other side of the wall.
But what a brutal way
Not
to find out.
Yeah, it's a bad way to find out,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't have been able to do much anyway.
So you mentioned that you spent 50 weeks in hospital and
Yeah.
at the point of leaving didn't feel kind of suitably rehabilitated. You suffered a pressure sore, which will be familiar for many with a spinal injury.
Yeah.
Um, how did that happen and why was it so difficult to overcome?
Well, I've got a theory, and it is only a theory. I think it's my wife's theory more than mine, actually. Her theory is that I was so badly injured, they really didn't expect me to survive.
Okay.
And therefore, the priority was just to do what they could to keep me going, and they didn't pay much attention to the pressure relief.
Hmm.
I was on my head where the red head blocks had been left on too long, for
Yes.
instance. Um, so, it's a difficult thing to prove negligence in that area because they would say they kept me alive, and bloody hell, I'm grateful for that. So,
Mm-hmm.
but the pressure sore did cause immense difficulty. I mean, I had to. By the time we got to Pinderfields, I was just lying on my side for a long time,
Mm.
alternating left and right. It's indicative of the problem that when I arrived at Pinderfields and they sort of checked me in, the senior nurse that I saw there took one look and said, "Wow, you're not getting out of bed for a long time." It was black necrotic tissue, the size of an orange, really.
Yeah.
Um, and miraculously, it healed without surgery. Although the area of scar tissue I've got is very big, and
Yeah.
so 10 years later, I still have an issue in
Yeah.
that it instantly breaks down.
I can
Um,
I can
and I
relate
have
to
to go
that.
to bed rest as and when that happens.
Yeah. I think some people will probably be wondering how does such an injury even happen? But I think part of the blessing of spinal injury is that without sensation, you don't know if you're sitting on a fold or a
No, you're
plug. You could be sat on anything.
not a clue. And I was on my back all the time.
Yeah.
Um, it affected me so much that to this day I cannot lie on my back
Really.
and become and relaxed because
Yeah.
I'm just paranoid about a problem.
And as you say, that scar tissue will always be a bit weaker and pose a risk.
Absolutely. And the older I get, the more risk it will pose.
Yeah. So it's a serious thing. But
I have the district nurse visiting once a month, which is a good thing anyway
mhm,
to look at skin. I advocate that very strongly. And they've been brilliant over the intervening years
yeah.
of spotting issues, patching me up, and making sure I'm okay.
Yeah. What about bowel and bladder management? Because that's another common shock
Non-existent.
post-spinal injury. Non-existent, really.
Non-existent when I came out of hospital. Um, the best thing I ever did was meet with the coloplast nurse, and she demonstrated the peristine system to me, which again, for those who don't know, it's an anal irrigation system. You use a catheter, you pump air into it that blows it up, you pump water in, you release the balloon, and everything should come out. Works brilliantly for me. I know it
Yeah.
doesn't work for everybody, but
Yeah,
it's
no,
great.
that's a very accurate description of what it does. And I think there's an argument to be made that it's better than a lot of alternatives like suppositories because that's using a drug, which
Yeah,
variable
I
effect
just
on
I
people.
just take small amount of senna. That's
Yeah.
all I need. And then the other side, bladder, is intermittent catheterization and touch wood. That works fine as well.
Yeah. So, and I think
Now,
that,
fine. But at the time, it was none of this. I didn't know anything about it really.
yeah, it's
Uh,
a steep learning curve.
catheterization I was okay with, but the bowels I wasn't.
Right.
So I had to have help at home for quite some time.
From the district nurse, was that or?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and they were brilliant.
Yeah.
I had an episode of sepsis in 2018 in a general hospital, and again, this is hard to believe, but they would not offer any bowel care for 5 days, 5 nights that I was in there. They wouldn't allow the district nurses to come in.
Mm.
Crazy. They said it was a different team and they weren't allowed to do things in the hospital, which I now realize was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was very ill and I, couldn't really
You're
speak.
so vulnerable in that position that you kind of have to accept it. But when you say it out loud, it sounds ridiculous because it is.
Yeah,
Um,
the trust policy is not to provide bowel care. No way. But
take
at the
out the
time,
word, if you take out the word bowel there, that becomes less acceptance.
absolutely. We know that not having the correct bowel care for a certain period could be fatal.
Yeah,
That's not an
absolutely.
exaggerated situation. Um, so yeah, it's crazy, really.
So it sounds like you had a pretty rocky experience as a hospital inpatient overall then.
Great. I, I would hate to be an inpatient again in a general hospital.
Hmm.
I know we don't have any choice, probably. If you get sepsis, you're just going to be carted off, aren't you? Um,
I share
And,
that
you know, to
concern
be
though.
fair, they did look after me from a sepsis point of view, but that part of the care was definitely missing.
Yeah, I share that concern, and I every time I become unwell with a UTI and think about going into hospital, I think, but they won't have a clue about this, and this will just get neglected.
One thing to be clear on, though, it was a UTI that developed into sepsis,
I
which
was
is
going
quite
to ask, yeah, I was going to ask about
well.
that. Whether you had any problems with UTIs?
Well, I used to do frequently. And in fact, it was a UTI, and I thought it was just a UTI. So you get a temperature, you get the shivers, and then you take an appropriate antibiotic and it goes away. The district nurse, by pure luck, was visiting me and she said, "You're going to A&E." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, You're absolutely delirious. You're talking nonsense."
Mm.
I said, "More than usual." She said, "Yeah," because she knew me very well. And, thank God, next thing you know, I'm in a hospital just down the road. And if she hadn't spotted the signs of potential sepsis, I could have been in a lot more trouble than I was
Yeah,
because it was the UTI that developed that. So, at what point do you think this UTI is more serious than usual?
that is the difficulty because perhaps many people will be familiar with the typical symptoms of a urinary tract infection, like fever, burning when you pee, going more frequently than usual,
Yeah,
urgency as well.
temperature,
But
temperature's a biggie, isn't it?
but a lot of those you just don't get in spinal injury because your injury is complete. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. So no sensation. Um,
So
but I
you,
knew what a UTI felt like,
yeah,
but I didn't realize it had gone so far that I needed intravenous antibiotics.
yeah. I've had a similar experience. Not very pleasant.
No, not at all. No.
Are there any particular memories other than that that stand out from your inpatient hospital time or time in rehab?
Just the lack of proper rehab. But on the positive side, I made some friends for life in there. Yeah, rehab standout moments, just the inpatient, institutionalized warmth that you feel because you're in a safe space with people who know what they're doing.
Yes.
It was worse for my wife because she had to do the long drive every day and go home to an empty house. And, that was more stressful than me playing silly games with the nurses. Once they become your family.
How did your family cope with it?
Badly. My wife still struggles with it. Two daughters, one I think is okay. I think she is. The other one really did struggle, and she got counselling for herself.
Mhm.
Um, it's so difficult. My wife lost so much. Um, Now I'm her husband, but she is a carer as well, and it does put a strain on everything. Little things that again people don't think about. The absolute loss of spontaneity. You can't just say, let's go away for a weekend. Well, okay, I'll spend the next 5 hours researching, to make sure it is actually suitable accommodation.
Yeah.
Let's go to that restaurant that we like. Oh, I can't get in. They've got no ramp. It's little things like that that
All
drive you.
sadly very familiar, but you're right in that it really challenges a relationship dynamic, even a strong one, because like it or not, especially in the early stages, if you have someone that's committed to being with you, they may well at sometimes be forced to take on a caring role. And some people are more comfortable with that than others.
I mean, what's the statistic? 75% of marriages don't survive a UTA, a spinal injury. I think that's
Is it
accurate.
really?
I believe so. Yeah. We're lucky. We're still here. We're still going.
Yeah.
But is it strained at times? Yep,
Hmm.
for,
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
sure.
I can relate to that. I'm not yet married. I'm getting married this year, but I've been with my partner for 10 years and she thankfully didn't leave me. I know a lot of relationships do
Does
end.
happen.
Yeah, she's a keeper. But
Yeah,
I'm very conscious that I don't want spinal injury to adversely affect the relationship. I mean, inevitably it does, but
it does. But I am very lucky now in that I'm 99% self-reliant.
mhm,
Um, I took a big decision to put a ceiling hoist in when we were redoing the house. So yes, I can transfer, but I'm rubbish at it.
right.
I've two broken hips, which have not been fixed. That doesn't make transferring easy. Long story, but won't go into that. But anyway, I put best decision I've ever made because I can do everything myself. So much so, my wife goes away for uh, at least one break. She's got off to Spain in June for a week, and I don't have any worries about looking after myself and the
Mhm.
dog.
Yeah.
So, you know,
How,
it's fine.
I'm interested, how long did it take you to get to that stage where you could say, right,
Oh,
my that's
a year
a
easily.
year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Without the ceiling hoist, I probably would struggle every day.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a great decision. When we go away on holiday together, then she is more carer than wife because I'm not as good at transferring. So if we go to a hotel or a cruise, which we do,
Hmm.
I need a hell of a lot more help than I would do at home.
Okay. Do you still remember your first day after being discharged from hospital? Or
Yeah,
first couple of days?
yeah,
What
scary.
scary?
Because all of a sudden you go from this institutionalized existence where everybody understands you and they get it and they'll help you at a moment's notice.
Hmm.
Um, and you get home and you think, oh my God, I really don't know how to do some stuff. It was very, very frightening
Yeah. And I think a lot of people will relate to that because all of a sudden you're dropped in at the deep end.
for sure in a totally alien environment. As I say, I hadn't even been to the house before, so it was doubly alien. One thing though that, people cope. So many times somebody says, oh, I don't know how you do it. I couldn't do it. Well,
Hmm.
you could actually, because the alternative doesn't bear thinking about. But I would have to say, and this is not me saying this, this is everybody who knows me, I am an exceptionally resilient, positive person by nature.
Hmm.
That really helps.
Yeah, that definitely helps, doesn't it? And I often think the exact same thing that you just said, that people wonder how you cope, but you have to because you're forced to. The alternative is just giving
Yeah,
up. And perhaps some people do that, but it takes a certain sort of person in the face of that difficulty to just carry on. But you have to, don't you?
yeah. I mean, my number one issue right now is pain management. I am in constant pain.
Hmm.
Um, and that's hard for people to understand because hang on a minute, you've got broken hips. That's below the area of your paralysis. So how can you feel anything?
Hmm.
So neuropathic pain is a mysterious thing and it is horrendous. And I every day, the first thing I feel when I wake up is pain. And the last thing before when I hit the mattress, it's wonderful. But from the minute I'm up and about, the pain is there and it is horrendous.
Yeah,
Even doing what I do in schools and everything, I'm constantly in pain. The great thing is I just don't think about it as much.
yeah.
The distraction.
Again, very relatable, that feeling at the end of the day when you just, oh, flat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Okay.
pain management for me is not about drugs. It's about distraction therapy and just finding a way of not thinking about it as much.
Mhm. That's interesting because I think one of the things that people struggle with the most is getting on top of different medications they're on and all of the side effects that come with them. Because many people who have both musculoskeletal and neuropathic pain will be on a cocktail of opiates like morphine and then neuropathic agents like pregabalin, gabapentin. And
Yeah,
those,
I wean myself off the bad ones.
yeah.
I realized after a while, I stopped taking gabapentin overnight. Big mistake, because I was in cold turkey for sure. But I then weaned off over 3 months, and I thought, why was I taking that? I don't feel any different now. And the same with one or two other things. I still take 21 tablets a day, for God's sake, but I've weaned myself off the nasty stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, and I can't take opiate based. If they give me a tramadol, that's me gone
Yeah.
off with the fairies. So the pain management is really paracetamol and just managing it. Uh,
I wanted to touch briefly on attitudes to before and after the injury.
oh,
Friends, colleagues, people staying in or leaving your life. What was your experience of people and how they treated you after you came out of the hospital?
good friends stayed with us. Casual friends drifted away.
That's a
Uh,
very succinct summary.
you're not surprised by that, are you?
No.
Um, that's just the way it is. Family has to stay and try and be supportive. They don't understand half the time. Um, But some friends, some friends who might have said, "Hey, let's have a beer" or whatever. Over time, you think, "Why am I not hearing from them?" And I was always reaching out to people. I hate that phrase, but what I mean. I was always trying to stay in touch. Hey, let's have a chat. But the pandemic probably allowed people to drift away.
Mm,
I, 'Cause it was noticeably different after that.
yeah,
Um, but great friends have stayed with me. I'm delighted to say I've made quite a few new friends as a result of this, as my wife has indeed. So it's more positive than negative, much more.
that's a lovely way of looking at it. And again, echo that sentiment. You during for any kind of hugely challenging life issue, the good friends are the people that
Yeah.
stick with
And
you.
you don't need that many good friends. People say, "Oh, I've got all these friends." Actually, how many have you got that would really drop everything and help you? You know,
Yeah, yeah.
you don't need.
And I'm interested. So you were injured 2013.
Yeah.
Were you working at the time? And if so, what did you do
I
and how?
was I was I was running my own consultancy business. I had quite a big career in finance that
Right.
ended abruptly, and I started taking a pension at the age of 52. Can you believe? Then I got into running my own consultancy business. I was doing okay, and I chose to work um, when I wanted to. We were very privileged. We had a lovely house in Spain, and it was nice to be able to say, you know what, I'm not working in June because we're going to go over there.
Yeah.
We had to give that house up, and it was a lifelong dream to have this house in the sun. We'd spent a fortune renovating, building, you name it, and we had to let it go. Again, my wife took that harder than me.
Was
Um,
that because it
okay,
was inaccessible, or was it because you
oh, it was on a mountainside with more steps than you can imagine. I would have
accept
needed about 30 lifts. It would have
difficult
been
in a chair
impossible.
then?
Yeah, it would have been impossible. So we had to let it go. We couldn't afford to keep it just for my wife to use. She also gave up a lovely car because
Hmm.
she needed to change things. So that only material things, bricks and mortar, but when it's been taken away from you and you wanted none of, you didn't bargain for any of this,
Hmm.
the partner, that's tough,
Yeah,
very tough.
it's difficult to make peace with that. And I suppose that
Yes,
would be
yeah,
a nice segue into briefly touching on the what ifs, because I'm sure
yeah.
you played this game, I'm sure, a lot during your inpatient stay,
I
but
did. I did to start with.
yeah,
What if I had not driven home? Because my wife asked me to not do. She said, "No, get in the car. Let's go home." She holds that against me. I think
mm,
um, that I didn't listen. Um, the what ifs of what if I'd gone out an hour earlier? What if I'd been a different day? What if I'd turned left instead of right at the bottom of the road? All those things. I had to stop it because I was going crazy.
yeah. Is there any utility in asking those sorts of questions, do you think, or is it just torture?
I think you just have to stop the what ifs as quickly as you can and
Yeah.
accept. You've got to accept what's happened. Those people who say I still can't accept it, well, good luck because that will eat away at you. You've got to accept it. You've got to realize it's one of those things that you could not have done anything about. You
Hmm.
can't change the outcome. All you can do is manage how you react to the outcome, and not doing the what ifs is crucial
Yeah.
for me. That's the one thing I'd tell anybody who's newly injured. I know it's hard, but do not do the what ifs because you will drive yourself nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a blind ending tunnel. It doesn't produce anything
Yeah.
productive.
And you all do it. You're lying there and you're making a mental list of all the things that you've lost and you can't do anymore.
Yeah.
It takes a while before you open a new list of things you can do,
Yeah.
but that's the list you've got to keep looking at.
Yeah.
Um, and that's just so important.
I guess we've chatted so far about the injury itself, the time in
Yeah,
hospital, challenges along the way in a very compressed manner, and bowel, bladder, skin, all those sorts of issues. But I suppose the main reason I wanted to chat to you was about Grandad Wheels.
yeah,
Pleased to see you're
right.
repping that on your top.
Let me talk. Yeah, I'm in the corporate wear. Let me talk about that then. So, grandson, 6 months old when I had my accident. So obviously he knows nothing different.
Hmm.
But I just had this worry when he was about 6. I thought, I wonder what's going to happen one day when he says, Grandad, why are you different? Why are you in that wheelchair? What
Yeah.
am I going to tell him? So, me being a silly person, I decided I'd tell him that I was attacked by a lion in the jungle. The lion jumped out from behind a tree and tried to rip my legs off because he likes silly stories. And my wife said, that's actually quite funny. Why don't you develop it a bit?
Hmm.
Never written a story in my life. So I did. And I wrote about 1,500 words. And I thought, well, this could do with some pictures. So I tried to find a friend who could draw. That was how desperate I was because I can't draw at all. Um, 2 people said they'd have a go, and then they very quickly dropped out when they realised how much work was involved, and I wasn't going to pay them anything. It was just like a vanity project, really. But somebody said, "Well, don't give up. Why don't you try a local art society?" So I wrote to a local one, and somebody came back and said, "Oh, there's a lady here that wouldn't mind having a go. She's a really talented artist, but she's not done cartoons because I wanted it to be cartoonish."
Yes.
Because my vision for this silly granddad was that he was going to get up to stuff that you couldn't do in real life. So it needed to be more of a cartoon than a real person. Um, so Charles had always called me Grandad Wheels, so that set me off with the idea. Anyway, this artist sent me a couple of sketches. Oh wow, they're amazing. I said, well, look, I can't pay you. I'm retired. She said, well, so am I.
Mhm.
I just want to do it for fun. So she did, came up with beautiful illustrations to put together a 32-page book. We sent it off to publishers and agents who all wrote back saying, that's very nice, but not for us, thanks. So, do you give up or do you think, sod it, I'm going to do it myself? So we both put a bit of money into it. We had it designed locally by a friend and printed. How many did you print? 10? I don't know. Well, he said, you've got to print 1,000, otherwise it's not worth it. Well, what
1,000.
the hell am I going to do with 1,000 books? Anyway, we had a bit of a launch event with family and friends, and they bought a few. Great, that's 20. Fantastic. Um, now what? And I had a bit of work done for me by Irwin Mitchell. Didn't really come to anything, but I told them about it and said, any chance you can sponsor me? And they said, well, yeah, okay. And they had a launch party with a few local press people and what have you. And by pure good luck, my life is full of good consequences, good coincidences.
Hmm.
By luck, a friend of a friend invited a teacher,
Right.
school in Leeds, and he said, I'll have 60 of these and I want you to come into my school and talk to the kids.
Oh,
Wow.
fantastic.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So I did, and the kids, I'd never done that before, but the kids loved the story. I put some slides together as a backdrop.
Hmm.
And parents ordered books. I thought, well, I'm onto something here. Tweeted about it. Other teachers using Twitter said, oh, what do you charge? Do you charge? How does it work? So started to put documents together. Next thing you know, I'm in another school. And as at tomorrow, no, as at yesterday, I've done 160 schools.
Wow.
Um, so not long after we started, this was 4 years ago, I wrote a second story, confident that there was interest. We then did the same thing. We self-published it, which is not too difficult to do,
Okay.
really. The artist stuck with it. And I've got 5 now, which are published, and number 6 is in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Um, so they are self-published. The only way you can get them is on my website, grandadwheels.com.
Hmm.
Um, they're aimed at all primary school age kids, and they're silly. I
Yeah.
didn't want I didn't want what already existed. There are books out there about a disabled kid called Timmy, and let's all be nice to Timmy so he can play with us and what have you. I'll get lost.
Yeah.
Kids are not interested in that. Kids want somebody to do something silly. So the second book is all about a supermarket where, to help me out, Charles, or Charlie as he's called in the books, hangs a fire extinguisher on the back of my wheelchair and pulls the pin out, and I cause mayhem. The third one, luckily, Hannah Cockcroft allowed us to make a cartoon of her, and the story is I beat her in a race, um, helped by a dog pulling me along. Then there's a Christmas one in the same supermarket where I'm persuaded to become Santa.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't know about it until the store manager asked me to put the uniform on. So they're all silly stories.
Yep.
The very latest one is set in a zoo where a snake manages to hide in my backpack and emerge at the wrong time. And it's just silly, chaotic stories, and kids love them. I'm
Yeah.
delighted to.
Well, what a fantastic way to introduce the often difficult topic of disability
Yeah,
to kids.
because in each book there's a little bit about what it's like to be in a wheelchair,
Hmm.
but not much, just
Yeah.
enough to make kids realise that it's unusual.
And I would imagine that in a way takes the focus away. So you're not saying, oh, look, he's in a wheelchair,
Yeah,
or
no, absolutely. It's a story about a silly granddad,
yeah,
first and foremost.
who happens to be in a wheelchair and a bit of
That's,
education.
but it's
So
not. It's not the be all and end all. It's
yeah,
showing that you can still have fun in a wheelchair and be fun to be with.
yeah, that's fantastic. And I think the success you've had has been testament to the fact that, that's something that people want.
Yeah, well, I've seen 30,000 kids now, give
Hmm.
or take, because I keep a running total, hundreds of teachers. So I'm obviously having some kind of impact there.
So when you go into schools, is that for a kind of question and answer session? And if
I
so,
So I asked them about, what might you, if you had to use a wheelchair, what do you think will be difficult? And we talk about stairs and grabbing things from high places and all. They always, and then I read a silly story, which is about 10, 15 minutes, then questions. They always ask me, how do you go to the toilet? All of those things. And I answer everything.
yeah.
Pull any punches with it because they can take it. And then I get them to design a crazy wheelchair.
Mm,
So they've got a template of the Grandad Wheels cartoon, and I get them to design a wheelchair. But I said, like, I don't want wheels on it. I want jet rockets, tank tracks,
yeah.
laser beams. I want a big tank of beer on it, and all sorts of things. And they just love that so much.
Hmm.
And then I get to look at some, and we have a bit of fun with that.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
and
a,
then
such
obviously
a
the books beforehand.
that's a lovely way to be creative with it because I think often with wheelchairs they often just seem so clinical and functional and
Yeah.
yeah, just
Well,
look a bit
funnily enough, the SIA have asked me to help get kids to design um, a super fast wheelchair for their 50th anniversary. So we're
right.
working in the next few months.
Hopefully
So that'll
that's
be.
something that comes into production.
It will. They're putting enough into it. There's a big prize for the best one, and they're definitely going to go with it. So I've just got to make sure the kids come up with something good now.
Yeah. Oh
But
well,
because it's so inventive.
hearing that, I'm sure they will. That's the
Oh,
creative
great.
mind.
And the prize is amazing. I can't really say what it is, but it's a fantastic prize.
Okay. Well, we'll
So
watch
I'm
and
looking
wait about
forward, I'm
that.
looking forward to that. The other thing I should mention is right from the word go, we thought, well, if we sell a few books, what should we do with the money? And we decided to give it to charities. So we
Yes.
split it with SIA and backup, thinking it would be a few £100, and it's now up to £72,000, which
Wow.
is a big wow. Never in a million years thought we could do that.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
and that's invaluable because so those two organizations, for those who are unaware, um, if you're in the UK and sustain a spinal injury, then Backup and Spinal Injuries Association or Scotland will at some point pop up on the radar for you, and they provide all sorts of help from things like wheelchair skills to courses away, doing para sports, things like that. They provide you with support getting back into work, and
That's
they're
why I
just
chose backup. I chose the SIA because they're a big, supportive, but also a campaigning organisation.
hmm,
But I chose backup because they're very practical, and I really enjoyed when they came into Pinderfields and gave us a bit of a tutorial on wheelchair skills. And I
yeah,
thought, you know what, that's essential. So that's why I decided to support the two.
it is.
And even they would suggest that whilst the money is wonderful, um, they are more impressed by the fact that I'm seeing kids and people and demystifying spinal injury and showing the positive side of it. So they think that's much more valuable than the money I'm donating.
Yeah, I can see where they're coming from there because financial support is obviously important and that's one side of things, but changing people's attitudes is arguably
Yeah,
more valuable over
they
time.
can raise what I've given them on a golf day,
Yeah,
or a dinner, but you can't replicate what I'm doing easily with, seeing 30,000 kids
Yeah.
and loads of teachers. That's just as important, the teachers, because they're grown-ups and they um, don't know stuff about my situation.
Yeah. But it's quite a nice thought to think that those 30,000 kids one day they will grow up to be adults without these stigmas and
More empathy, maybe.
yeah, maybe that's being overly hopeful, but I don't know. I think I'd like to be optimistic about that.
Well, and the other thing is, I've heard that my books are the ones most taken out of the school library,
Hmm.
uh, and they're still talking about the visit 6 months later. So
Yeah.
it's obviously had an impact.
Yeah. Well, I'd imagine it's not the sort of thing they get every day. It's something a bit different.
Well, and because I am very silly, I'm
Uh,
not what they expect. They expect somebody reading a book. Well, no, I'm doing it off by heart, and we're just going to have a bit of fun.
mhm.
So
So
I think
you briefly touched on it there, but what is next for Grandad Wheels?
keep doing it as long as I can. From a health point of view, I do restrict myself to 1 or 2 visits a week, and
Hmm.
I only cover within 1.5 hour drive.
Right.
So from my point of view, it's Liverpool to Hull, York to Chesterfield. So it's kind of an oval like that.
Uh-huh.
But I can do virtual ones like this anywhere in the country. So I can do that as well. I just want to do it as long as I can. Sometimes I feel like I'm work's going to dry up. And then I did a school yesterday, and I've already had requests from 2 nearby schools.
Hmm.
There's 5,000 primary schools in the area that I cover,
Yeah.
so I shouldn't run out of work really.
Uh,
But
how
budgets
many,
are tough now for schools.
how many have you
Um,
been to so far then?
160.
160. Okay. Sounds like there's plenty more to go
Tidy
to.
proportions. But school, not every school can afford to have visitors. I do charge a fee,
Hmm.
not a big one. I know in the scheme of things, I'm very cheap
Yeah.
for a day, but not every school can afford anything like that.
Sure.
So, I'm not going to get all 5,000 realistically,
Yeah.
but there's still quite a few to go at.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, well, that is fantastic. And I mean, it just shows that for many people who think their lives would be over, you can do something incredibly original, creative, and
Yeah,
meaningful with
absolutely.
and because of a spinal injury.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I love doing it. I mean, my wife loves it as well, so I'm not here.
Hmm.
So she absolutely loves it when I go out.
Yeah.
Why are you going to school this week? But I have paid the price. I mean, 2 years ago, I spent the whole of Christmas week in bed with what looked like a new pressure sore. So you've got to be so careful.
Hmm.
That's the number one issue that I worry about
Yeah.
is the skin.
And is for people who might not be familiar, is that just from the traveling point of view
Uh,
and contact?
mainly,
Yeah.
mainly, yeah. Because at home I use a hoist, so there's minimal risk. But
Hmm.
with a transfer, you can pinch the skin, you can do all sorts of things, as you know. People find it hard to understand why I say being unable to walk doesn't even make my top 5 problems.
Hmm.
To manage that, it's quite easy actually. It's the other stuff. It's the pain, the spasm, the skin, the lack of bowel management, bladder management. So all those things are more of an issue for me than not being able to walk.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. And I think most people's
Get your head
first
around that if you don't know spinal
it,
injury.
it is. I think the moment you see the wheelchair, you think, "Oh God, that must be
Yeah,
awful to be able to."
but yeah, walk,
Yeah,
yeah.
but it belies a well, I suppose an ignorance of the gravity of the problems that is bowel, bladder, skin, all the rest of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I haven't told you the best bit.
Oh, go on, go on.
Okay, my life is full of crazy coincidences. I also do stupid things.
Right.
Okay. I don't know why. I just do them.
Okay.
A few years ago, I got a mountain equipment padded jacket, the big kind of
Yeah.
deck jacket that keep you warm in any temperature. Um, it doesn't fit me anymore, so my wife has used it. God knows why. I mean, look, but it doesn't for some reason. And my daughter has used it. And one day my daughter said it was not keeping her warm because the zip had broken.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, I'm not happy about that. So I wrote an email to Mountain Equipment saying that I'm really not happy. I want this treated as an official complaint. And I'm going to be telling consumer organizations about your shoddy products. I bought this coat in 1977 and it was showing signs of wear. And it was just a stupid tongue-in-cheek email. And they very nicely wrote back saying, well, if you've still got the receipt, we'll fix it for you. Damn, foiled again. But the lady who wrote back, she said, I've taken the trouble to Google your name and I read about your accident. That happened outside my house.
Oh, wow.
So she remembers the kerfuffle that day,
Yeah. What a coincidence.
which is crazy. But a week later, I had and by the way, they offered to fix the jacket and all of that, which was nice.
Good.
But about a week later, I got an email from somebody called Joy Derbyshire,
Hmm.
who said that her father met somebody in the pub who heard it from this lady at Mountain Equipment. And she said, I was the lady who shouted for help.
Oh, wow.
Wow. And to cut a long story short, we were then on the One Show together. She was introduced to me in a school on the One Show.
Hmm.
Incredible, emotional,
Uh,
as you can imagine. So
yeah.
that you can see that clip if you go on my website and just click on the links.
Uh-huh.
So we're on the One Show and we sold a lot of books on the back of that. That was interesting.
I
Freaked
bet.
me out. They showed the river and they did this thing where they put a camera under the water. Ah! My wife couldn't watch it, and I found that very difficult as well.
Yeah.
But it was an amazing thing. And then um, about a month after the One Show was on the telly, um, I was in a school in Warrington. Now, bear in mind, I live in Halifax. My accident happened in a little village in Derbyshire, and I went to a school in Warrington. So you imagine that as a big triangle,
Yeah.
nowhere near any of the other points. And I did what I always do. I told the kids the story because Joy managed to explain to me about somebody who came in the water to hold my head out of the water, which I didn't know about. And one little girl called Emily in year two, she went home and her dad said, what did you do at school today? And she said, well, this man came to talk to us about what happened to him. And he was really lucky because he was in the river and somebody came in and helped him. And that was her dad.
Wow.
So can you imagine? That's on the population of the area I cover. That's about a 15 million to one chance.
Yeah.
I could have been in the school down the road, or more likely, Emily. When her dad said, "What do you do at school?" Emily could have said, "Can't remember," which is normal.
Yep.
And so he got in touch with me, and we were then on BBC Breakfast with Naga and Dan
Mhm.
um, being interviewed. And again, that program is a link on my website. So two unrelated. He didn't see the One Show, so he didn't know. He thought I was dead
Oh, wow. Okay.
because he went back to the campsite a year later and asked about me, and they said, "Oh, we think he died."
Yeah.
So, so imagine his surprise when he realised that his daughter was talking about him.
Oh,
Just incredible.
what an interesting way that is to kind of come full circle. We were talking about what ifs before. That
It's
same
absolutely,
thing could be applied here. What if she had just not mentioned that? And there were so
yeah.
many ways in which that couldn't have come
What,
together.
yeah. Or what if mountain equipment were based in Basingstoke?
Yeah.
But that is a crazy coincidence. The other one is even crazier in a way.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
and
so.
both very happy. I'm now friends with both of them, and we go out socially, and it's just amazing.
That is,
And I should show you this. My latest book, the last one is about a runaway electric wheelchair. And if you look at the
love
cover,
it.
you will see a man with a beard and a baseball cap and a lady looking over a wall. Can you see that?
A bit higher. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's Joy and Stephen, the people who saved my life. So they there's a picture where they're running away from this crazy, out of control man in an electric wheelchair, and they're having to leap out of the way.
I bet they didn't think they'd be featured in that.
No, but what I was able to tell them, and that was just wonderful. So, yeah, so there you go. How's that for an ending?
I mean, that you couldn't make that up. You wouldn't believe it if it
No,
was written down in a story.
both coincidences. It was just absolutely
Yeah.
stupid.
And
Um,
also,
and none of this would have happened if I hadn't met that teacher when I was launching the book.
yeah,
None
another
of it.
fantastic example of how wonderful things can happen in spite of, and in this case,
Yeah,
because of a
yeah.
catastrophic injury. Yeah,
So just remarkable.
yeah,
Um, yeah. So that in a way that keeps me going. It's just fantastic that those things happened.
yeah.
Yeah. And
Well,
people were
I'm really
getting.
glad to hear they did. It just incredibly positive, incredibly random, and
Yeah.
yeah. So a lot has happened over the past 10 years.
Oh,
And
good. Yeah.
this series is predominantly aimed at people who are newly injured and perhaps just finding their feet is the wrong term, but you know what I mean.
This
But
shows that anything can happen anytime. I've now started a new career.
uh-huh,
Um, I started that new career after 60. I've never written a story before. The idea of publishing a book was something I would never have dreamt about in my wildest dream. But
yeah,
over the age of 60, I've gone in this entirely new direction as a result of spinal injury.
yeah. I think that's
Not
a
because, but as a
very,
result of.
very fitting message to end on. I think I was going to ask you, what would you say to someone who's been newly injured? But that
Try,
sounds
do everything, try everything. I've never done para sport or anything because I'm frankly not interested.
Mhm.
Um, I know very often it's the sports people in our world that are lauded and have the profile. Most people in our world really are heroes because they just get out of bed
Yeah,
and cope. But they're not the inspirational ones, are they? But I'll tell you what, I know a few people in our world who are far more inspirational and they don't do anything famous.
yeah, yeah. That's quite a
It's not
poignant
physical.
message. In a
Physical.
way, the sports side is the easy thing to focus on because for
Yeah,
someone with a physical disability, the sight of someone overcoming that to achieve physical excellence makes you think, wow, that's impressive, isn't
yeah.
it? Physically impressive.
But to be quite honest, it's not as impressive as the seriously badly injured person who gets up every morning and just cracks on with life.
Yeah,
That's the bit that we should see as inspirational.
I totally agree. But it's less of a headline, isn't it?
Yeah, of
So
course it is.
yeah,
Of course it is. I'm not taking anything away from the people who achieve
no,
something in the sporting world. Of course not. It's wonderful. But it's not for everybody, is it?
no, absolutely not. And I think especially as someone who was injured slightly later in life, the opportunities in terms of sports are perhaps more off
Yeah.
limit.
And
Um,
I've been there and done it, to be quite honest. I've leapt out of a plane several times. I don't want to do it in a bloody wheelchair. Thank you very much.
I'm with you
Yeah,
there. I'm with you
got
there.
the t-shirt for that one already.
Yeah.
I,
Okay.
I often wonder, what is more difficult to be injured at an older age when it's hard to adapt, maybe, or to be injured younger when you've not got all those things ahead of you.
So
I think on balance, I'm happy it happened to me at 56 because I'd done a hell of a lot anyway.
that's
Um,
really interesting because I spoke to the other guest I had on was my friend Joanna, who is younger.
yeah,
She's in her mid-20s, and I think we kind of agreed on that we thought it was maybe better on balance to be injured when you were younger because you're more plastic or more
well, it's,
adaptable.
it's personal though, isn't it? It's personal.
It is, but that's really interesting to hear kind of your approach of, well, you've done more beforehand. So yeah. So you think it better on balance to be injured later if you had the choice?
I think it's well, obviously you don't. So in a way, it's a what if,
It
and
is.
I don't,
Oh,
I don't do what ifs.
fair
It's
enough.
just it's personal to you, isn't it?
It is. It is. It is. Okay. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story. I think it's a really fantastic one and certainly one that I've been following for a little while and caught my eye. And when I saw that initially a couple of years ago now, I thought, wow, that is fantastic. That is just, yeah, it
Well,
shows what you
the shameless plug is if anybody wants to buy a book, I don't keep the money. It all goes to charities to help people with spinal injuries. So you can get them off my website, grandadwheels.com. You can follow me on X or Twitter as it was, and on Facebook. Maybe you could share the links at the end of
link
the
in the description. Absolutely. Yeah.
description because um, somebody might follow me not thinking anything more, but one of their friends might see it and might be a school teacher, and you just never know. So the happy coincidences I seem to be exposed to, more of them.
Let them keep coming. I agree
Yeah.
entirely. Okay.
Right. It's been fantastic to talk to you.